Wow, would you look at that sunrise? That's beautiful. Good morning. Welcome to Freeway Bible Study. Today, Genesis 8. And God remembered Noah. My name is Kurt Bell. I'm a non-believer, but a very interested non-believer. I'm interested in the stories and beliefs that people of lots of different religions have. And I'm also, I'm interested, mainly just interested in whatever is true. And part of it is uncovering whatever people think is true. So, to that end, I study the Bible every day. And I'm working my way from Genesis through to the end of Revelation. So today we're on Genesis 8, where God is basically going to remember Noah and his family, who have now set sail, or maybe it's better to call it set drift upon the global sea, following the flood. Following the flood in Genesis 7. So let's jump into it. So oh, look at that sunrise. I wonder if it's coming through well on the camera. Sometimes it's more detailed in person than in camera, of course. So I read this one through. I probably read this through more than 10 times. I read it maybe 3 times in between the different versions of the Bible, and I listened to it many times. And this exercise alone is worthwhile for that very fact as well. Just the fact that I'm paying a lot more attention to this. And what I found is that with every reading of this chapter, the story sounded more lyrical. I like to use that word. And the impression that came to mind was I was imagining myself sitting around a campfire with loved ones, long time ago, in an age when campfire stories were how wisdom and knowledge was passed along. We're sitting around the fire. Maybe we all had a nice warm dinner. All the dishes are cleaned, or however they cleaned it back there in the first century. Or this wouldn't be the first century, even before that. Back in the very, very long ago. And the children are sitting around, maybe feeling a little sleepy, and someone's asked, one of the storytellers to tell the story of the flood. And of course, this information is being retold from memory. And imagining that helped me to forgive some of the inconsistencies and the disjointed nature of things when I remember that it's being told in that way, and it's because that's likely the way it's going to come out. And if someone was recording this from memory, they're probably going to record it in the way that they would have told it, and it wouldn't have always been consistent or clear. It would have been kind of disjointed. So that helped me to see that by listening to it over and over again. I also began to see better. Oh, look at that sunrise. See and understand. I literally see. It really does feel like I almost see the story, see the events occurring better. So let's jump into it. So this opens with in Genesis 7, the flood. That's one of the big chapters of the Bible. That's when the flood happens. The sea is now covered with water, and Noah and his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and Noah's wife and his sons' wives, as well as 7 pairs of every clean animal and 1 pair of every unclean animal, are now sealed into the ark and set adrift. And in Genesis, I think it's either 6 or 7, we hear that they're going to be on the waters for 150 days, which I think in a previous video I mentioned that they would be afloat for 5 months. I learned in this chapter in Genesis 8 that time was only 5 months, was just the amount of time what could it be? We know that it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. So just what happened during the 5 months? Because they were in the ark for a lot longer than 5 months. So I guess I don't know. What was that 5 months deal about? As long as I'm on there, I might as well cover that point. I know it was longer than that because I looked at the chronology, if that's the right word, and Noah and his family, God instructed them to enter the ark on the 17th day of Noah's 600th year, which I just out of convenience called February 17th. I know it probably wasn't February. I don't think they were using that calendar type thing. I don't even know what season it was, but we know it was Noah's 600th year on the 17th day of the second month, so that would be February. I'm going to call it February 17th for convenience. And that Noah finally left the ark, and that was the day that that's the same day that the rains began and God commanded them to enter. And then in Genesis 8 we learned that Noah and his family left the ark on the 27th day of Noah's 601st year. Did I say 600th year in the previous? So the first, he entered in the 600th year and departed the ark on his 601st year on the 27th day of the second month. So let's just say that he entered on February 17th of 600 and left on February 27th of 601st year. That means 1 year, 10 days if we're, counting our years correctly. And I know that there might be, people might have different ideas about that. That's a long time. So what was that 5 months? What was the 150 days? Well, it certainly wasn't the rain. The rain was 40 days. We all know that, right? That's famous. Well, anyway, so we'll just let that sit there. So anyway, they're floating along. Imagine what that was like, floating in that sealed boat. And it says in Genesis 7 that God sealed the boat. Maybe he just meant that he was protecting the occupants and the boat's integrity from what was going on outside the boat as the flood waters began to rise upon the earth. I'm sure there were lots of people banging on the doors to get in. So maybe that's what that meant. Because Moses in Genesis 8 is able to open the window from time to time and do things with that. Meanwhile, everybody's down inside. Gosh, heaven knows how they're getting by with a single window and 7 of everything clean and 2 of everything dirty on 3 decks. I was thinking about that as well. Just begin to imagine we're sitting around that fire and we're a kid. And what do we know? And God, and it's just to say, the story makes clear that the distinction between cattle and the animals of the earth. Which I'm sure, of course, cattle are a small minority if we actually know what we know about zoology today and taxonomy. Sheep, cows, pigs, that kind of stuff would just be a small fraction of the animals. But to the people of the time, that would have been the opposite. So imagine you're that little kid listening to the story and you hear that the ark is full of all the cattle and the animals of the earth. You're picturing a boat with a great proportion of sheep, goats, pigs, I guess, whatever the cattle were at the time, some chickens maybe, and then some of everything else. And if you're 12 years old, 10 years old at the time, everything else might include, the critters that you see running around the tents where your family lives, or the village or the little city where your family lives. Maybe you've heard or seen, some big animals. Probably you've heard of lions and things like that, from Africa. But you probably don't know very much. Your conception of wild animals is probably pretty meager. You can probably easily imagine all that fitting into a boat, even the 7 of every clean, of 7 pairs of every clean. Yeah, that's probably a workable thing. Now I can kind of see how that would fit in the time. This only becomes absurd when you magnify the cargo of the ark by contemporary knowledge of just how many species there really are. So yeah, so that flies. That's good. And so I guess if you consider that God was overseeing everything, and specifically it opens this chapter saying that God did not forget Noah and the animals. So that means God's looking over all of this, and being God, I guess he could take care of everything. Clean up the waste, make sure there's provisions. Make sure all the animals are behaving one another. The cheetahs aren't racing down the decks, racing across the decks, hunting stuff, running down the river otters. What's this? Wow, cool. Some stuff I can get. So anyway, I'm being silly. Let's get back on track. So that goes on for 7 months. Let me see if I can pick out the milestone dates. And this is where listening and reading it many times really helped out. Some of these milestones popped in, or stuck in my head. 7 months was a milestone. 7 months was apparently when Noah's ark came to rest upon the mountains of Ararat. In the King James edition, it says the mountains of Ararat. It doesn't say Mount Ararat. It says the mountains of Ararat. So it could be anywhere in those range. I know that we typically think of it as Mount Ararat. So we think there's one mountain, that's where the ark is, somewhere on that mountain. But, and being a guy that spends a lot of time exploring in the desert, it's a big difference if you're going to pinpoint something on a particular mountain or on a particular range. Where I go out to the desert is the Bristol Mountains. It's one thing to go to Mount Wildness, if something is on Mount Wildness versus something on the Bristol Range. Forget about it. It's a lifetime worth of effort to explore the whole Bristol Range. Likewise, the Ararats. Anyway, so 7 months in, and the ark comes to rest. Now, I'm picturing in my mind that means it's touching bottom. But it isn't until the 10th month that we can begin to see the tops of the mountains. And that's a beautiful image. I never thought about that until I read this. I'm always imagining before that they're floating. Whenever they look out the window, they just see an endless horizon of water on either side. But no, in the 10th month, they can start to see the tops of the mountains peeking up here and there, which would be basically islands. But on the 7th month, 3 months earlier, the ark came to rest somewhere on Ararat. It means it was touching ground. But that would indicate, unless it was just a touch and go, did it just touch and then float off again? But if that's the case, and then 3 months later, the water continued to recede, that would mean that the ark would be resting on what would basically be one of the high summits of the Ararat Mountains, assuming there are a range. That would help us to pinpoint it pretty clearly, and that would also help us to realize that there's some, this is where it's easy. I mean, it would be easy to spend the whole Bible study series in this video in particular trying to pick apart the pieces and say that doesn't make sense because this thing. And here I'll just throw out an example. It doesn't make sense to say that in the 7th month the ark came to rest upon the mountains of Ararat, which is indicating that you can't see it. So it's like you're just touching bottom. It's like, within a cubit or so, however deep it goes down, a couple of feet, the ark is struck bottom, but you can't see it yet. Maybe if you look over the side, you can see some mud down there. But we know that Mount Ararat, that the Ararat range are not nearly as tall as any of the Himalayas, and it's in 10th month they can, I get it. In the 10th month, it's not that the tops of the mountains are visible, peek out of the water, it's that they can see it. That means that, and the only people to see are Noah and his family. Okay, so it's entirely possible that Everest and all those mountains were revealed months prior, after the rain stopped, and now we're just getting down there. Okay, that makes sense. Hey, you were my brother! That's what bikers say to each other. Well, that's what I say, at least. So, occupational hazard. So, sorry. So, okay, so there we go. 7 month touching ground on Ararat, but can't quite see the mud. Can't see the sea yet. 10 months can see the mountains around, starting to peek out, starting to dry up. So it's, I don't know what the elevation of Mount Ararat is. I should have checked that. I should have checked the elevation of the Ararat range. I think I've seen photos. It's not that bad. It's like those mountains directly ahead. I think it's smaller than that. Less than 10,000 feet, I'm sure. I don't know that for sure. So that's totally manageable. I can see that it could be cold up there, but again, we're dealing with God, right? So he can create a bubble of warm air around them or something. So anyway, so 10th month we've got the mountains appearing. Now this is when Noah begins his experiment. So first he takes up a raven, and I guess it's pretty good that the raven just went away and disappeared, because that wouldn't be so beautiful to imagine the imagery, the symbolism in Christian literature, pamphlets and on the side of churches. It's just we like to see the raven flying with the olive branch, but if it was the dove, it wouldn't be so pretty if it was a raven, would it? Big black raven with an olive branch. Well, we got used to that. I don't know. I mean, we've totally become desensitized to the fact that the cross is actually an instrument of torture, and we don't see it that way at all. Maybe we'd see ravens in a different light if the raven had come back. So anyway, so Noah, brings a raven, which I hope is one of the 7 clean. Well, clearly it was one of the 7 clean animals, because the raven, he sends the raven out to investigate it, and it doesn't come back. All we know is that it flies to and fro. Does it say until the waters recede, which would be still months away? Well, anyway, the raven doesn't come back. So Noah must say, well, that raven, you can't trust them for anything. Speaking of, there's a duck right above me. Maybe you should have tried a duck. Actually, a duck would have been a good idea, because the duck could, land on the water, right, and take a break. Well, anyway, he didn't do that. So he gets a dove, and he sends out the first dove, and the dove, I can't remember the details, but it comes back with nothing, right? It can't find. Oh, it's a female dove, because she comes back because she can't find any place to rest her wings. She can't to place her feet. Some words like that. So God closes things out, or Noah closes things up for 7 days and tries again. And I don't remember if he failed that time, or if the dove failed that time to find anything, or if it did it another 7 days, or if that was the successful one. But I think in that time the dove comes back with the olive leaf, not an olive branch, but an olive leaf in its mouth. Which by then we're probably seeing lots of land, right? I mean, if we've seen the tops of the mountains and this is ongoing, so Noah knows that there's land. So I guess what he's looking for is not dry land, but he's looking for some place that's habitable. And the effect of the olive leaf means that there's plants growing. And that's a pretty neat trick, to have 10 months underwater, yet and then emerge and then have olives growing. But again, we can forgive these inconsistencies. We're dealing with God after all. And I don't mean that in a sarcastic way. It's really what I mean. I mean, if God is so powerful, then these things should be small problems. We can forgive the inconsistencies, or what might appear to be absurdities to someone that doesn't have the power to do anything, to do everything. I mean. So now we're in the 10th month. Okay, the 10th month, and Noah knows that it's in good shape. And now the details are a little fuzzy right now, but it's going to be another 2 more months for some reason. For another 2 months, or at least a month, between a month and 2 months, they remain in the ark. And I remember thinking about that as I was reading it, because it was clear that we had the olive leaf. You can see the land. The boat is probably resting on Mount Ararat, or one of the mountains in the Ararat range. But yet they stay sealed up inside. It's not until... Does God give them the command? Maybe? But anyway, Noah opens the covering, whatever that is, of the ark. I didn't think he took off the roof. But I guess he opens the door, and then the animals, that's where we see the iconic image of the animals proceeding out to filter onto the land. And God comes out, time to get his lyrical, beautiful wordage language pin out, and he's telling them, go forth and prosper, and he gives him specific. I think Noah tells his sons to be fruitful and multiply, and this is the start, right? The reset button has been hit, and now it's time for all of creation, what's left of creation, to get busy and repopulate the earth. And hearkening back a chapter or two, don't we all know what the result is going to be? I mean, if we took a sample of corruption, transplant that sample of corruption to a new world, aren't we going to expect more corruption? Unless Noah somehow changed, God somehow changed Noah, which I don't think he did. So, well, clearly he didn't. So anyway, so that's that, and then what happens now is they're all disembarked from the ark, and they're all out there. And this is interesting. It wasn't until like the third or fourth reading or listening that this finally struck me. Noah proceeds to have the mother of all of all offerings. I mean, later in the Bible, we'll see some big offerings where, hundreds or thousands of animals will be offered on the altar. But depending on which version you read, I think if you read the King James Version, Noah takes a representative of every clean animal, of every one of them. And this is now we know why there were 7 of each, right? Because we needed some for the sacrifice. He takes a representative of everyone. Forget about the dirty animals. Not going to sacrifice those. And I'm sure all the dirty animals at the time were like, whew, man, good thing I didn't bathe today. So he takes that, but in the New International Version it says he takes representatives of every clean animal. And it's like interpretation there, right? It's like whoever was translating or preparing the New International Version saw the absurdity of sacrificing every clean animal, one or more of every clean animal on earth from the ark, and just wrote that in, that it was some of them, slipped in the word, a representative or something like that. Stuff like that, I don't like that. That's real evidence that God is tolerating humanity's interpretation, and we're winding up with 2 different stories. I mean, you compound that error over 1,100 plus chapters, and that explains a lot about why we're so schismed in terms of the sects of Christianity. But anyway, let me go on. So God then builds a bonfire and proceeds to have the mother of all offerings. I mean, this is a barbecue to end all barbecues. I mean, he's offering, depending on the version, if you go with the King James Version, which is a very commonly accepted version, if you go with that, he's offering at least one of every clean animal. Can you imagine? That's astonishing. So the result is that smell, and this gives us some insight into it. I mean, why people did burnt offerings. I mean, we all love the smell of cooking meat, and that smell, where does it go? Well, it rises right up into the sky where we think God lives, and so clearly we're sending a pleasurable experience to God in the form of the nice smell. And God, in Genesis 8, recognizes that. He smells this the aroma of the meaty barbecue aroma of this incredible sacrifice, and he becomes regretful. That's worth lingering on right there as well. God seems to regret what he's done. If that doesn't give you pause right there, because our common conception of God would be that there would never be any regret, that God likewise no anger, jealousy, or vengeance, or remorse, or anything. God would always be almost like a Buddha, in a perfect state of equanimity. But we know that's not the case. We know that God is a jealous God, and God clearly is a regretful God in this case. He says, he indicates, I will never do, in his heart he says, I will never do this again. As long as the earth remains, which is a nice coverage, because someday that won't remain accordingly, apparently. As long as the earth remains, I will never do this again to the earth. I will never wipe everything out. So he regrets what he's done. A little late. Not much you can do about it now. Well, I guess he could, but he doesn't, and we carry on. And at that point, the chapter ends. Now, it depends on which version you're on. If you read the King James edition, it begins. The last chapter is a prose chapter. The last verse is a prose verse, and it's lovely, but not as lovely as the New International Version, which breaks it out into poetry. The verse basically says, as long as the seasons come and go, and the warmth, the heat, and the cold, and the seed, and the life, and death, and it will carry on forever. I'm doing a rotten job. But that very same bit in the New International Version is actually broken out into verse. You could almost sing it, and it's much nicer. So again, humans taking liberty with the words and the delivery and the vehicle or not the vehicle, but the method by which they're being conveyed. One in prose, one in poetry, which have different results, right? Seems like a gross liberty, and I don't mean that gross in the disgusting term. I mean in excess. Imagine if I was someone trying to interpret something, I would do so in as exact a manner as possible. So one of those two, someone who did those translations, one of them veered away from it, because one of them chose to do it in prose, the other to do it in poetry. Now maybe this is where a Bible scholar could step in and say, Kurt, you know so little. But still, it's one. I mean, I think I'm safe to say that in the original, it's one or the other. It's either prose or poetry. I don't imagine it can be both. And someone in one of these major translations of the Bible took liberties to change it. So that gives me cause to be suspicious. Suspicious not of their motives, but suspicious of their allegiance to accurate translation. And with that said, I'll close from there. So thank you for joining me for another Freeway Bible study. I hope you have a wonderful day and a very make it a good life. Take care. Bye bye.